I was driving alone. The sun had just dipped behind the mountains, and the gorge was swallowing the daylight fast. The air turned cold quickly, the way it does when the last rays vanish and the cliffs trap the chill. My rig hummed along the asphalt, tires humming against the pavement, and the radio only carried static. I flipped through the dial a few times, nothing but white noise and faint, warbling clicks. I usually like driving at night, the roads empty, the headlights cutting through the dark like a knife. But that night felt different from the start. There was a weight in the air, damp and sharp, the kind that presses against your chest when the fog starts rolling in, thick and unrelenting. At first, it was just a white haze clinging to the trees along the cliff edges, but soon it started creeping over the guardrails, thickening by the mile. Then I noticed shapes standing at regular intervals, tall and upright, just beyond the edge of the road. I thought they were maintenance crews or other drivers who'd pulled over, maybe inspecting the road or taking a break. That made sense for a moment, until I realized none of them had reflective vests or anything to mark them as people. The shapes didn't move, even when my headlights swung over them. It was like they were frozen, planted along the guardrail in the fog, perfectly still. I slowed down, heart picking up, and my eyes kept darting to the mirrors. Every time I glanced back, the fog seemed heavier, thicker, almost as if it was following me. I could see my own taillights reflecting off the white mist, but there was more to it, a density that hadn't been there a second before. The shapes stayed where they were, unwavering, and I swear I could feel them watching me as I drove past. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I realized I hadn't passed another vehicle for miles. Yet the impression of eyes on me didn't leave. I kept driving, trying to shake the feeling, but the gorge closed in on both sides, cliffs pressing from one side, trees crowding the other. The road was twisting, and the fog rolled over each bend in layers, swallowing the headlights almost entirely, leaving me in a kind of gray tunnel. I adjusted my speed, keeping it steady, but my instincts were screaming at me. Something wasn't right. Eventually, I spotted the rest area. I didn't want to stop, not really, but I needed to clear my head. The lot was empty, save for a single pickup facing the wrong way. Its rear end pointed toward the highway. As I passed it, the driver's side window fogged over from the inside, a thick sheet of condensation, and I caught something in the shape of two eyes looking straight at me. My stomach dropped. When I parked and stepped out, the lot was empty. No one was in the pickup, no footprints, nothing that suggested anyone had been there at all. I walked around the vehicle slowly, flashlight cutting through the mist, but the cab was empty. I climbed back into the truck, doors locked, and sat there in silence. My sandwiches from earlier in the day sat on the passenger seat, cold and wrapped in foil. I ate them slowly, listening to the sound of my own breathing and the occasional whistle of wind through the trees. The fog crept across the gorge, twisting through the ravines and clinging to the cliff edges, thick and unyielding. It wasn't just a weather thing. It had a weight, like it was aware of the shapes it was hiding. Every so often, I thought I saw a movement, a shift in the fog, but it was probably just my mind reacting to the stress. I stayed in that rest area until dawn. I didn't sleep, though I wanted to. The headlights of passing cars on the highway were rare, just a pair every half hour, and they offered a strange comfort, cutting through the gray walls outside. I watched the sun slowly rise, orange bleeding into the fog, and as it climbed higher, the shapes along the guardrails disappeared. One by one, they were gone, absorbed by the light or perhaps just hidden by it. The fog began to lift, retreating back toward the trees and the cliffs, leaving the gorge looking like it always had, familiar and quiet. When I finally got back on the road, the sense of weight was gone. The highway stretched out normally, the asphalt dry and empty, the guardrails unoccupied. I checked my mirrors again and again, half expecting the shapes to appear somewhere in the distance, but there was nothing. It was just a gorge in the morning light, mist hovering over the valleys, no hint of the night before. I told myself it was a trick of the fog, my mind reacting to the darkness and isolation. I've driven that route countless times, and I've seen fog before, heavy enough to make you doubt your own senses. But that night, there was a presence in it I couldn't explain, a feeling of eyes on me even when there were none. The rest area pickup, the shapes by the guardrails, the way the fog followed me. It all felt too precise, too deliberate to be random. I drove on, reaching the next town and pulling into a gas station, shaking off the last of the tension. The clerk looked at me like I'd seen a ghost when I asked for a coffee, but I didn't tell anyone what happened. There was no one to tell. No one would believe a trucker driving alone in the gorge, seeing figures in the fog and empty eyes in a parked pickup. Weeks later, I asked other drivers about the stretch of road. Most shrugged it off, talking about heavy fog and isolated spots where deer or hikers sometimes wandered near the edge. One older driver mentioned seeing weird shapes in fog along the gorge once, back when he was hauling logs. He never stopped to look, said it was better not to. That was the closest thing I found to an explanation. No one had answers, no one had concrete sightings. Just stories and warnings about the fog in that section of road, how it could play tricks on you if you were alone long enough. I've never driven that route at night again. I stick to the daylight hours, keeping to the main highway whenever possible. Sometimes I see fog rolling in over the cliffs, thick and white, and my stomach tightens. I think about those shapes, standing perfectly still along the guardrails, and the eyes in the empty pickup. I still don't know what they were. I only know what I felt, and that it was real enough to keep me awake for hours, staring at the mist, convinced I was being watched by something that couldn't exist. The memory stays with me, sharp and persistent. Every time I drive alone at dusk, I check the mirrors, I scan the roadside, I feel for the weight of the fog. I know the shapes were gone with the sunrise, and I know I'm alive to tell the story, but I can still feel that pressure when the gorge swallows the light. That night wasn't supernatural, it wasn't a dream, and it wasn't imaginary. It was isolation, darkness, fog, and something in the edges of perception that I can't explain, and I don't think I ever will. I'll never forget the way the shapes held still, or the way the fog seemed to chase me until I stopped. And I'll never drive that stretch of road at night again. I was hauling a sealed load of paper rolls through the Midwest in late October, running a tight schedule that left no room for delays. The weather had turned early that year. The fields were already brown, the air dry and sharp, and the sky stayed low and gray for most of the day. I'd been on the road since before sunrise, alone as usual, the cab smelling faintly of diesel, old coffee, and cardboard from the food boxes behind the seat. By the time evening came, my shoulders ached from holding the wheel, and my eyes felt grainy from staring down straight roads that never seemed to end. The highway thinned out after sunset. Fewer headlights, fewer taillights. The radio faded in and out, mostly static, so I shut it off and drove in silence. I prefer silence when I'm tired. Keeps my thoughts straight. Around 9 p.m., I passed a sign for a rural way station listed as open. I hadn't planned on stopping, but the fuel gauge was lower than I liked, and the next truck stop was still miles away. I decided to pull in, get checked, top off if possible, and stretch my legs. The way station sat back from the road, lit by tall yellow lamps that buzzed faintly. The pavement was cracked and patched, weeds pushing through the edges. There were no other trucks in line, which struck me as odd for that time of night. Usually, at least one rig was waiting. I rolled forward slowly, windows down, engine idling low. The main building looked dark. No movement inside. The electronic sign still showed open, but it looked old, like it hadn't been updated in years. I pulled onto the scale anyway. The truck rocked slightly as it settled. I waited for the signal to move forward, but nothing happened. No lights changed, no buzzer. I sat there for a full minute watching my mirrors, listening to the engine tick. I told myself it was just understaffed or automated. That happens. After another minute, I eased forward, clearing the scale, and parked off to the side near the building. When I shut the engine down, the silence felt heavier than it should have. No insects, no wind, just the hum of the lights overhead. I stepped out of the cab, boots crunching on gravel, and stretched my back. That was when I noticed a sedan parked near the far edge of the lot, partly hidden in shadow. It hadn't been there when I pulled in, or at least I hadn't seen it. The car was older, dark-colored, with no lights on. The windows were tinted enough that I couldn't see inside. I assumed it was an employee vehicle. That made sense. Still, something about the way it was parked bothered me. It wasn't lined up with any markings. It sat at an angle, like it had been left in a hurry or placed to watch the entrance. I shrugged it off and walked toward the building to check the door. It was locked. A small sign said the station was temporarily unstaffed and directed drivers to proceed if no signal was given. That explained the silence. I went back to the truck, climbed in, and started the engine. As I pulled toward the exit, I glanced in the side mirror. The sedan's headlights flicked on. They stayed still for a moment. Then the car rolled forward, slow and smooth, falling in behind me. I told myself it was nothing. A worker heading home, a local cutting through. The access road was short, and when I merged back onto the highway, the sedan followed. That still meant nothing. Plenty of people used the same roads. I settled into the right lane, brought the speed up, and focused on the road ahead. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The sedan stayed behind me the entire time, never passing, never dropping back. Its headlights sat at a steady distance, not too close, not far enough to disappear. When I changed lanes to let it by, it changed lanes too and stayed behind me. When I slowed slightly, it slowed. When I sped up, it matched me. I felt the first real knot of unease tighten in my stomach. Truckers get followed sometimes. Road rage, curiosity, people looking to mess with someone bigger than them. Most of the time it ends quickly. This didn't. The highway grew emptier as the night deepened. Exit signs flashed past, each one a chance for the car to leave. It never did. I checked my mirrors constantly. The sedan had no visible markings, no roof rack, nothing that suggested law enforcement or a service vehicle. The driver stayed invisible behind the windshield glare. I kept both hands on the wheel, posture stiff, heart beating harder than it should have for a straight, empty road. After another stretch of miles, I decided to test it. I signaled and took an exit marked for a small farming town. The ramp curved down into darkness. No streetlights, just my headlights cutting across empty fields. At the bottom, I slowed and turned onto a narrow county road. The sedan followed without hesitation. That erased any doubt. No one heading somewhere else would take that turn at that hour unless they had a reason. I felt sweat gather at the base of my neck. I stayed calm, kept my speed steady, and watched the road. The county road ran straight for a few miles, then dipped through a shallow valley. Trees closed in on both sides, branches bare and reaching over the pavement like ribs. The sedan stayed with me the entire time. I considered stopping, but the road offered no safe place. No houses, no lights, just fields and trees. I kept driving until the road reconnected with another highway. I merged back on, relieved for the wider lanes and better visibility. The sedan merged behind me again. By now, I was fully alert. Fatigue was gone, replaced by something sharper. I knew I needed a plan. I couldn't drive forever. I checked my map and spotted a large, well-lit truck stop about 15 miles ahead. Fuel, food, other drivers, witnesses. That was where I needed to go. I stayed on course. The sedan stayed behind me. When the truck stop finally came into view, its lights felt like a small city rising out of the dark. I took the exit and headed straight in. As I slowed to turn into the lot, the sedan slowed too. I pulled past the fuel lanes and into a row near the building, surrounded by other rigs. I stopped, set the brake, and shut off the engine. The sedan rolled in behind me, then kept going. It drove past my truck, slow enough that I could see the side clearly. The windows were dark. The body had scratches along the doors, old and uneven. The car circled the lot once, then headed back toward the exit without stopping. I stayed in the cab, watching until its taillights vanished onto the highway. I didn't sleep much that night. I stayed parked among other trucks, lights on inside the cab, replaying every mile in my head. In the morning, I asked the clerk about the way station I'd stopped at. He told me it had been unmanned overnight for months due to budget cuts. He also mentioned, without much interest, that drivers had reported being followed after stopping there. Local thieves would wait nearby, looking for tired drivers hauling valuable loads, trying to see who would panic or pull over alone. Everything snapped into place then. The empty station, the angled sedan, the steady distance. They weren't trying to scare me for no reason. They were testing me, seeing if I'd stop somewhere quiet, somewhere they could work without witnesses. I finished my coffee, went back to the truck, and got on the road. I avoided that way station from then on, even if it cost me time. I stayed on main routes at night and trusted my instincts more than my schedule. Nothing supernatural happened to me on that run. No unexplained figures. No impossible events. Just people using isolation, darkness, and patience to their advantage. That made it worse in a way because it meant it could happen again anywhere to anyone driving alone and tired. I still check my mirrors more than I used to, especially at night. And when I see a car that stays just a little too steady behind me, I don't ignore it. I drive where the lights are, where other people are, and I don't assume silence means safety. I was running a night haul through the southern plains, moving refrigerated goods east on a tight window that left no room for misstops. It was early summer, hot even after dark, the kind of heat that seeps into the cab and never fully leaves. I had been driving since late afternoon, alone as usual, the trailer humming behind me, the engine steady and familiar. The road was flat and endless, bordered by open land that disappeared into darkness beyond the reach of my headlights. The radio faded in and out, so I shut it off and let the sound of the truck fill the cab. Around midnight, I pulled into a small rest area just off the highway. It wasn't a proper truck stop, just a wide paved lot with a bathroom building, a few picnic tables, and dim lights that cast long shadows. I didn't plan to sleep long, only long enough to use the restroom and check the load. The place was quiet. No other rigs, no cars, just insects buzzing around the lamps and the low tick of my engine cooling as I shut it down. I climbed out and walked the length of the trailer, hand on the metal, feeling for anything off. The seal was intact. The doors were locked. Everything looked fine. I remember thinking how still the air felt, like the night was holding its breath. I finished my walk around and headed back toward the cab. That was when I heard a sound from inside the trailer. It was faint at first, almost lost under the hum of the lights. A dull thump, followed by a dragging noise, like something shifting weight against the floor. I stopped, listening hard. The trailer was supposed to be empty except for pallets strapped tight. Nothing should have been moving. I told myself it was the load settling. Refrigerated trailers creak and pop. That's normal. I took another step, then heard it again, clearer this time. A slow scrape, then a pause, then another scrape. It sounded deliberate, not random. My pulse picked up. I stood still, eyes locked on the trailer doors. The metal looked unchanged, solid, indifferent. I walked closer, placing my ear against the side panel. The cold from inside bled through the metal. I heard breathing. It was unmistakable. Slow, uneven breathing muffled by insulation and distance. I stepped back, heart pounding hard enough to feel in my throat. My mind ran through options fast. Someone was inside my trailer. That meant they had gotten in at some point earlier in the day, maybe at a loading dock, maybe during a fuel stop when I wasn't looking. It also meant I was standing alone in a dark rest area with no other people around. I didn't open the doors. I didn't knock. I backed away and got into the cab, locking the door behind me. I sat there, hands shaking, staring through the windshield at nothing. The breathing continued, faint but steady, audible even from inside the cab now that I knew it was there. Minutes passed. I didn't know how many. My thoughts kept circling the same questions. Was it one person or more? Were they hurt or hiding? Were they dangerous? I thought about calling for help, but the signal was weak, dropping in and out. I turned the key and started the engine, the noise loud in the still night. The breathing stopped. That made it worse. I eased the truck forward a few feet, then stopped. Nothing. I did it again. Still nothing. I pulled back into the same spot and shut the engine off. The silence returned, thick and heavy. Then came a knock from inside the trailer. It wasn't loud. Just a single, solid knock from deep within, like someone testing the wall. I stayed frozen in the driver's seat, every muscle tight. The knock came again, this time followed by a series of slow taps, moving closer to the doors. Whatever was inside was shifting position, crawling or walking toward the back. I reached for the door handle, ready to leave the cab if I had to, but my legs felt weak. I didn't want to be outside with whoever that was. I also didn't want to sit there if they managed to force their way out. The taps stopped right behind the doors. I heard fingers slide along the metal from the inside, nails scraping lightly, searching. The sound traveled across the door seam, slow and careful. Whoever it was knew exactly where they were. I started the engine again and put the truck in gear. I pulled out of the rest area without hesitation, tires crunching loud on gravel, then smooth again on asphalt. I accelerated hard, merging back onto the highway, keeping my speed high. The trailer swayed slightly behind me as the load shifted. From that point on, I didn't stop. I didn't slow. I drove straight through the night, eyes locked on the road, mirrors checked every few seconds. I kept expecting to see the doors burst open or someone climbing out, but nothing happened. No more knocks, no more sounds. Just the road and the engine and my breathing. After nearly 2 hours, I reached a major truck stop with bright lights, cameras, and other drivers everywhere. I pulled into a fuel lane and shut down. My hands were stiff on the wheel. My back hurt from tension. I got out, walked straight to the back of the trailer, and stood there for a long moment before touching the doors. The seal was still intact, unbroken. I cut it, swung the doors open fast, ready for anything. The trailer was empty of people. The pallets were disturbed. Straps were loose. One pallet had shifted far enough to leave a narrow space along the wall. Inside that space were signs of someone having been there. A discarded water bottle, a crumpled piece of food wrapper, a dark smear on the floor that looked like dirt mixed with sweat. The refrigeration unit had been running the whole time. Cold enough to slow movement, cold enough to keep someone quiet for long stretches. Later, after authorities checked everything, it became clear what had happened. Someone had climbed into the trailer during loading earlier that day, hiding between pallets. They were likely trying to hitch a ride, planning to get out once the truck stopped somewhere isolated. The rest area was probably their moment to move. When I started the engine and drove, they must have retreated back into the load, choosing silence over risk. I finished that run under supervision and took a few days off afterward. I still drive nights, still haul sealed loads, but I check more than seals now. I watch loading areas closely. I listen for sounds I used to ignore, and I don't stop at quiet rest areas anymore. What stayed with me wasn't fear of the person inside the trailer. It was the realization of how close they had been, separated by a thin layer of metal, breathing the same night air, waiting for the right moment. On the road, alone in the dark, small choices matter. That night taught me how quickly routine can turn into something else, and how silence can hide more than noise ever could. I was hauling refrigerated meat through northern Wyoming in late October of 2014, running overnight to make a tight delivery window in Billings. I had taken a secondary route to avoid construction on the interstate, a 2-lane highway that cut through long stretches of open range and badlands. I chose it because I had driven it before in daylight and trusted it more than the detours being pushed on the radio. That decision sat heavy in my mind later. The night was clear but moonless, the kind where the sky feels huge and empty. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the dark. Outside that tunnel was nothing but the outline of hills and fence lines that appeared and vanished without warning. I had been driving since early afternoon, stopping only once for fuel and a quick inspection of the trailer. I wasn't tired yet, but my body had settled into that numb, mechanical state where time stretches thin and every mile marker feels the same. Cell service dropped about an hour after sunset. The radio faded into static soon after. I kept going, watching the temperature gauge on the reefer unit, listening to the steady hum behind me. Every so often I passed a closed ranch gate or a dirt road that vanished into the dark. No houses, no lights, just land. About 30 miles from the nearest marked town, I noticed something odd in my mirrors. At first, it was just a flicker of headlights far behind me, low and uneven. I assumed it was a pickup, maybe a rancher heading home late. The road was straight enough that lights carried for miles. What bothered me was how long they stayed the same distance back. I wasn't speeding or slowing. They didn't close the gap or fall away. They just stayed there, two dim points bouncing slightly, never quite lining up like a normal vehicle. I checked my speed, then eased off the throttle. The lights slowed with me. I sped up a few miles per hour. They matched it. I told myself it was coincidence, maybe someone pacing me to pass later. Still, I didn't like it. There was nowhere to pull off except narrow gravel shoulders that dropped into shallow ditches. 10 minutes passed like that. The road bent through a shallow valley, and for a moment I lost sight of the lights. I felt relief too quickly. When the road straightened, the lights were closer now. Close enough that I could see they were mounted wide apart and low, not like a normal truck or car. The beam pattern wobbled, like the vehicle had a soft suspension or uneven tires. I focused on the road and kept my hands steady on the wheel. I didn't want to react. I didn't want to give whoever it was any signal that I noticed them. My mirrors felt heavy, like they pulled my eyes back every few seconds. Then the lights cut off. Not slowed, not turned away, just gone. I scanned the shoulders and the ditches, expecting to see them veer onto a dirt road. There was nothing. No dust, no engine noise. The night went flat and quiet again, just the sound of my own rig pushing air. That was worse. I drove another 5 miles before I saw the glow again, this time ahead of me, off to the right. A vehicle sat near a cattle guard, angled toward the road with its lights off. As I got closer, the lights snapped on, flooding the highway just as I passed. I caught a glimpse of a dark pickup with no visible markings, older model, lifted too high for comfort. The windows were blacked out. The truck pulled onto the road behind me almost immediately. My pulse climbed, slow and steady. I didn't like being boxed in on an empty stretch with no witnesses. I told myself to keep calm, to think like a professional. I checked my fuel. I had enough to run another 300 miles. The truck was solid. The trailer doors were sealed. I wasn't hauling anything unusual. There was no reason for attention. The pickup stayed back at first, then crept closer until I could see its grille clearly in my mirror. No high beams, no attempt to pass. Just sitting there, centered behind my trailer, close enough that if I braked hard it would end badly. I started watching for mile markers, for any sign of a town or rest area. The map in my head said there was a small service stop about 20 miles ahead, little more than a fuel pump and a diner. I focused on getting there. The pickup edged closer. The driver drifted slightly to the left, then back to center, like they were studying my trailer. I felt exposed, like my entire rig was transparent. I locked the cab doors without thinking. A few minutes later, the pickup moved to the left lane as if to pass. I held my speed. Instead of passing, it matched me, riding my flank just behind the cab. I refused to look directly, but I could feel it there, a presence more than a vehicle. The road ahead dipped and rose, the headlights throwing long shadows across the asphalt. The pickup fell back again, then surged forward suddenly, pulling alongside my cab. I caught a brief glimpse through the corner of my eye. One person in the cab, no passenger. The driver wore a hat pulled low. I didn't see a face clearly. I didn't want to. They slowed, dropping back again. Then the pickup swerved toward my trailer, close enough that I felt the air buffet the rig. My heart thudded against my ribs. I tightened my grip on the wheel and held the lane. The truck was heavier than anything they had. I trusted that weight more than my nerves. The pickup repeated the move, closer this time, then backed off. They weren't trying to crash me. They were testing me. I ran through options. There was no safe shoulder, no traffic, no signal. If I stopped, I would be alone in the dark with someone who had already decided to play games. I kept going. The service stop finally appeared as a faint cluster of lights on the horizon. I felt a surge of relief that made my hands shake. I flicked my turn signal early, hoping the pickup would peel away. Instead, It stayed with me, following me onto the access road. The lot was mostly empty. One fuel pump glowed under harsh white light. The diner was dark, closed for the night. A single sedan sat near the building, no movement inside. I pulled up near the pump, positioning the truck so my driver's side faced the light. The pickup rolled to a stop a short distance away, engine idling. I didn't get out. I sat there, watching my mirrors, listening to the reefer unit cycle. The pickup stayed put for nearly a minute. Then the engine revved once, sharp and deliberate. The truck turned around and drove back the way it came, disappearing into the dark without turning on its headlights until it reached the highway. I waited another 10 minutes before moving. My legs felt weak when I pressed the pedals. I pulled back onto the road and drove straight through to Billings without stopping again. The next morning, after delivery, I asked a local driver about that stretch of road. He didn't seem surprised. He told me about theft crews that ran rural highways at night, looking for lone trucks, testing drivers to see who would panic or stop. He said they rarely acted if someone kept moving and stayed visible. He said the ones who stopped sometimes lost freight, sometimes worse. I never took that route again at night. I didn't report the incident because there was nothing solid to report. No plates, no threats, just a long stretch of road and a truck that wanted to see how alone I really was. April of 2016 put me in rural Tennessee on a run that should have been simple. Construction materials, early morning load, in and out before daylight. My co-driver had come down sick 2 days earlier, bad enough that the company pulled him from the route. I chose to keep the run instead of waiting for a replacement. I had done solo loads before. This one didn't seem different on paper. The warehouse sat at the end of a dead-end road that peeled off a 2-lane highway and narrowed fast. The pavement gave way to patched asphalt, then to gravel. Trees closed in on both sides, tall and thick, the kind of forest that blocks moonlight and swallows sound. There were no nearby houses, no other businesses, no streetlights. Just the warehouse, a wide gravel lot, stacks of pallets, and forest in every direction. I arrived a little before midnight. The place was quiet, locked up, exactly as expected. This was a drop-and-load site. The shipment had been staged earlier in the evening. All I had to do was hook up the loaded trailer, secure it, and roll out. Because I was alone, I took my time, double-checking everything. The air was damp and cool, the kind that carries smells far. Wet soil, pine, old wood. By 2:30 in the morning, I was finishing paperwork in the cab. I planned to leave before 3. That's when I heard the sound. It was faint, a slow scrape, metal against metal, just barely audible over the idle of the truck. At first I thought it was the trailer settling, weight shifting as the temperature changed. That happens. I waited. The sound came again. Same spot along the right side of the trailer, low and controlled, not random. I shut the engine off. The silence pressed in hard once the truck died. No wind, no insects, just the distant hum of nothing. I stood still, listening. Another scrape followed, deliberate, shorter this time. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped down from the cab. The beam cut a narrow path through the dark, catching the reflective edges of pallets stacked near the loading bay. The sound stopped as soon as my boots hit the gravel. I walked slow along the trailer, light sweeping back and forth. The metal skin showed nothing out of place. No dents, no hanging straps. I moved past the trailer toward the pallet stacks that sat 10 yards away, wrapped in plastic and banded tight. That's when I saw the figure. It was crouched low behind the pallets, tucked into the shadows where the light thinned. The outline was wrong for an animal. Too tall, too still. It didn't move when the beam hit it, just stayed folded in on itself, head low, shoulders hunched. I froze. The air felt heavier, like pressure building in my chest. I raised the flashlight higher, tried to get a clearer look. The figure shifted slightly, just enough to tell me it was human. Dark clothing, no reflective gear, no sound. I took one step closer. The figure bolted. It didn't crash through brush or snap branches. It didn't stumble. It moved fast and clean, straight into the tree line, disappearing between trunks like it knew exactly where to go. The forest swallowed it whole. Silence followed instantly. I stood there longer than I should have, light trained on the trees, waiting for sound that never came. No running steps, no leaves shaking, nothing. My mind tried to grab onto explanations. A worker hiding, a thief scared off, someone sleeping rough who panicked. Animals don't move like that, but people do. Still, the speed and silence bothered me. I walked back toward the pallets, careful now, scanning the ground. The dirt was soft from rain earlier in the evening. My light caught impressions near the pallets. Boot prints, large ones, heavy tread, not work boots from the warehouse. Deeper heel, wide toe. They led toward the trees. I followed them a few feet, slow, keeping distance from the forest edge. The prints were clear, pressed deep into the mud. Then they stopped. Not faded, not smeared, just ended. No slide, no turn, no branching path. The ground beyond was undisturbed. I stood there, staring down at them, feeling something crawl up the back of my neck. There is no way to walk out of mud like that without leaving something behind. Even stepping onto roots leaves marks. These didn't continue at all. That's when the fear settled in fully, not sharp panic, but a steady, cold awareness that I was alone in a place where someone else had been moving quietly, deliberately, and without any sign of urgency. I backed away, eyes never leaving the trees, and returned to the truck. I climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and pulled the curtains tight. I didn't turn the engine back on. I didn't want noise. I sat there in the dark, listening. Every small sound stretched my nerves. The cooling metal of the trailer popping, a distant owl, wind brushing the cab. I watched the mirrors even though they showed nothing but black shapes and my own reflection. I stayed like that until sunrise. The sky lightened slowly, gray first, then pale blue. The forest came back into shape. Trees became trees again instead of walls. When daylight finally reached the lot, I stepped out. Nothing had changed on the surface. No signs of damage, no broken straps, no forced locks. I walked the perimeter of the pallets again, this time in full light. That's when I noticed the shift. The pallets were still stacked, still wrapped, but not exactly as before. Several had been nudged out of alignment. Wrapping tugged loose at corners. Bands twisted slightly. It looked like someone had gone through them carefully, checking labels, feeling weight, then moved on. Nothing was missing. That detail bothered me more than theft would have. Whoever had been there wasn't stealing. They were inspecting, looking for something specific, or confirming something wasn't there. I left as soon as the sun cleared the treetops. I reported the incident later, stuck to facts. Unknown person on site, footprints, disturbed pallets. There were no cameras at that warehouse, no security staff overnight, no follow-up that led anywhere. Over the next few weeks, the feeling followed me. Not fear of attack, but the sense of being observed. I found myself checking mirrors more often, pausing longer before stepping out of the cab, trusting my instincts instead of brushing things off. Eventually, the explanation formed into something solid enough to accept. Rural warehouses like that attract people who live unseen. Scrap hunters, trespassers, people checking loads for high-value materials. Someone knew that shipment was going out overnight and wanted to see what was there. When I interrupted them, they fled the way they came, through a path they'd already cleared, stepping onto packed ground or roots where prints wouldn't show. The prints stopping made sense once I thought about it. A hard-packed game trail begins right where the mud ends. In low light, I hadn't seen it. In fear, I hadn't stepped far enough to notice the difference in soil. What stayed with me wasn't the logic. It was how close it had been. How quietly someone had worked within yards of me. How easily I could have walked right past without ever knowing. Nothing else happened after that night. No follow-up sightings. No missing freight. No damage. Just a reminder that isolation doesn't mean empty, and quiet places carry their own kind of risk. I don't load alone at dead-end sites anymore. If I have to, I arrive in daylight or wait until someone else is present. The forest in Tennessee didn't do anything wrong that night. It just hid someone who didn't want to be seen and let them disappear without a sound.